All right, ladies and gentlemen, I understand why DCEU fans could be disappointed with this film, Justice League, especially with the score. When we see in the sneak peek Junkie XL's, I assume this is Junkie XL, and maybe it's Danny Elfman, but the Man of Steel theme sort of brings this trilogy to a completion. You know, it really brings back, ushers back in Superman with a familiar theme that is linked to this trilogy. So I can understand a lot of fans actually being disappointed that that theme wasn't emphasized on Superman's return. So there are certain things that I noticed Danny Elfman didn't do. He went the Richard Donner route, showing the direction WB was trying to do. They were trying to give a flashback from the past, and I didn't really hear much of the Man of Steel theme. And I thought, as a person, I can understand why DCEU fans are like, this is a trilogy. This is the end of the trilogy. This is a culmination of the trilogy. Why aren't they using those epic themes? Another thing I think that Junkie XL was doing, which WB thought was too dark, was going the sort of horrific route, actually giving callbacks to Pet Sematary, the music in Pet Sematary, callbacks to some of the more darker themes and just the more darker things that happened in this movie, which have been a little bit more mature for more mature audiences, and then children can be left out in the mix. So I think when we see the Zack Snyder cut, if this movie does well, we'll see all of that. So guys, think about it this way. You didn't get to see a Snyder cut with Junkie XL that was a little bit more grittier, it was a little bit more adult, that was a little bit more, had a little bit more details, a little bit more backstory, the characters were a little bit more fleshed out. But that's not a reason to hate on this film right here. But I am still happy that you guys sent a message to WB and to the forces or people who wanted to carry the DCU in a certain direction, that, hey, it didn't work for Green Lantern, it didn't work for Superman Returns. You guys need to let go of that stuff and go down, embrace your identity as the DCEU and go down that road. And whether the critics pan it or not, keep going that direction, because the critics still panned this movie. Pretty much most of them didn't like it. So at the end of the day, it really did make sense for them to just give the full Snyder cut and just let it be. You know, at least let the DCU sink on its own identity. So I get where some of these DCU fans were coming from. So that's their point of view. And I get where they're coming from. Let me just put it to you that way. Having said that, this is a Zack Snyder film. We know that certain things were cut out of it. But at the same time, guys, this is a damn good film. And for you to just let your emotions get carried away and to think that somehow, you know, I heard some really, because of the emotional burst, some really extreme statements like Zack Snyder, he got shafted by WB and by Joss Whedon, and so on and so on and so on. And I would say, while I know there are executives in WB who they're not in tune with what is actually happening in terms of the base, what the strong hardcore base really wants, I gotta say that some of them were kept in check to the extent that at least the schematic that Zack Snyder put out, his vision, is there. It's really there in this movie. I can tell you guys, I understand that everything's not tight thematically, especially with the music, and in terms of how Zack Snyder actually portrays explicitly certain things that need to be portrayed explicitly to really bring that value, like the return of Superman. There needed to be that weight. Not when he came back, where he wasn't good or bad, but in those moments with Lois Lane, and in those moments with those quiet moments to really cement the fact that he's back, and then to get that resolve, that formation of resolve, that this is a new, more improved Superman than before. So I get what you're saying, and I'm sure Zack Snyder would have spent a lot more time on that. But these things, while they are very important, were not overlooked because of the sheer power and presence of Superman in this final section of this cut. And so I think, hands down, Superman is he is the standout figure in this entire movie. and this movie was leading up to him. I was expecting Batman also to speak a little bit more about what Superman was and what he represents, because those things were in the trailers, to get more value, to get people focused in, dialed in even more on Superman. But I didn't get that. But the point is, you had a shift in directors, you had a shift in the musical director, which definitely would put a shift in the direction they were shooting for. But it doesn't change the overall vision. It doesn't change the tone of this movie. The tone of this movie is from beginning to end the same, which is interesting, even though it gets a little bit lighter. And so I would say that what we are getting is the condensed version of Zack Snyder. We would love to see that expanded version, that version that has the breathing room. This is what the cameraman was talking about, that breathing room for Zack to really tell his story. That's the version we would like to see, with the Junkie XL Hans Zimmer cuts inside of there. I'm sure it would be a lot grander. I'm sure it would be a lot grittier. I'm sure it would be a little bit more darker. I'm sure it would be also one in which it's more for adults than it is for kids. You know, this movie tried to do the Wonder Woman formula, where it's it shoots for, it still keeps the mature themes, but yet it can entertain little kids as well at the same time. So that's what they were shooting for. You know, people with short attention spans would say, "Oh, the film is boring." They can't say that anymore, because this film had you roped in from beginning to end, and it kept a certain rhythm and pace that you got sucked into the story. So I think that's what WB was going for. But I would advise WB in the future, because they've done this to Zack Snyder a couple times, but in this case, you can't really fault them, because they tried their best. I don't fault them for Suicide Squad, and I don't fault them for this movie. I think they tried their best. If Zack Snyder was there, Zack Snyder presented a cut, and then they shafted him, it would have been different. And from the get-go, it seems as though they wanted it 2 hours long anyway, because they, again, trying to maximize their profits, and they seem not to have learned their lesson the last time with Zack Snyder in that regard. So while I do agree that the 2 hour cut should not have been longer, I agree with them on this one. This particular cut didn't need to be longer. This particular cut is the right length. I will say, though, that they need to process the lessons that they learned from the last couple of movies. Zack Snyder's last movie, Superman, Batman v Superman, the ultimate cut, is 3 hours long, got so much breathing room. It's much better structurally than BVS, even though most of the things in Batman v Superman, the ultimate cut, I already knew in the theatrical version, but there's some new things I just did not know. And I'm sure the same thing will happen with this cut, except this cut is much smoother, because Joss Whedon did do a very good job. Now, the thing I don't like is the bashing of Joss Whedon. Like, he's just scapegoat. Suddenly, WB and Joss Whedon. And Joss Whedon did this to himself by liking that comment that bashed the villain of the film. So he did this to himself, but nonetheless, I still don't think it's right. I think this guy put in a lot of work on this movie, and he actually did more of the serious scenes of the movie. It is a combination of two directors, and I think just for that, we should be more respectful to the guy. You know, this is the same thing. You remember Zack Snyder said, I think Zack Snyder said something about how Iron Man, he's not really a high-profile character, and that got Marvel fans against Zack Snyder. That's kind of what triggered the whole thing. And of course, Warner Brothers still has deeper films, I think, DC, than Marvel films. To me, Marvel films are more superficial. But nonetheless, I think DC films are actually for more mature audiences. But nonetheless, the point is that Snyder got a lot of bashing because he made that statement. And I think that's not fair to him or to his movies. And critically, they've just been always bashing this guy. And that's the kind of thing we got. We got a double whammy. We got people bashing Zack Snyder, and then we had people bashing Joss Whedon, so that nobody's watching a Zack Snyder's film, which is his film. And that does not help the situation, guys. It doesn't. I just did my previous video, talked about the box office. We have to come together. We have to. That's what this movie was all about. Coming together. We have to come together as a team, and we have to work together. So guys, one more time, I'm encouraging you guys to come together. I'm explaining to you guys the situation. I'm the one cleaning up, trying to do damage control here, because this is ugly, And this is not good. We do not need the DCEU to be crumbling and destroyed off of some petty bickering. Yes, I'm glad you expressed your power, you flexed your muscles as fans, and showed that without you, the DCEU will fall. But now is the time to come together, and let's work together as a team for the common good. Put aside our differences, and let's shoot to get this movie where it needs to be. It has to make close to $1 billion or $1 billion to be a movie that's fiscally viable, and therefore keep the DCEU running. Otherwise, they're going to scrap this thing. And they don't care about you. They don't care about you that much. They listen to you, but they don't care about you that much. They care about money. They care about dollars. I'm not talking about all the people in Warner Brothers. There are people who care. But most people, they're thinking, if this is not fiscally viable, we're over with the DC. I don't care what plans they say down the road. And what's very important to understand is Warner Brothers held their breath, stopped all their agenda about all this slate of movies, and they said, let's see how Justice League does. That's because they're ready to pull the trigger if this thing doesn't do well. And they put out all their money. They put out $300+ million on this project, so that if this project sinks, they will say, oh, well, you know, the production budget was too high. That's the excuse they're going to make, and they're going to scrap everything like a Superman Returns. They're going to scrap everything like what happened with Green Lantern. They're going to scrap everything like what happened with Batman and Robin. Trust me, man. Trust me. That's what will go down. So, guys, this is not a time to continue in the bickering, and you had your time to vent and everything. You flexed your muscles. You showed that what you could do. Now it's time to get together and show WB that we, the fans, make your film. We, the fans, break your film. Okay? Show them by flexing your muscle now in a positive way, and then you can press for a Zack Snyder cut. That's what I tell you guys as fans. You can press for Zack Snyder cut. You can get the cut you want, but you're not going to get the cut you want if this movie flops. WB's not going to invest in that. You can put as much pressure you want. They're not going to respond to you because you crushed this film in the box office, and now they have to go and pay back their investors. They don't got money to go add more money to a Zack Snyder film to finish, unless Zack Snyder wants to do it out of pocket. You know what I'm saying? So think about what I'm saying now, guys. Let's get this movie successful. This movie's gone through so much, from all the rumors and the gossips and just all these negative things this movie had to overcome. And the haters and detractors, they would love to see this movie fail. They would love to see this movie fail, so they could say the DCU's fault and the DCU needs saving. They've been saying that for the longest while, and you guys subliminally have been registering all of these things over and over until this really is a moment where the DCEU needs to be saved. And the weird thing about it is, only you can save it. Only you, the DCEU fans, can save the DCEU. So if you're going to destroy the DCU, it's because of you. You can't blame nobody. You can't blame the critics. You can't blame the rumor people. You can't blame anyone. You'll have to blame yourself. And don't tell me, oh, I went out in the cinema and I watched it 4, 5 times, 10 times. No, you got to encourage people. It's about good PR. DCU fans by themselves can't make this film get to $1 billion. It's not possible. It's not going to happen. It has to take more than just DCEU fans. And so you're going to have to reach across to your Marvel brethren. And now after all that negative stuff you just said, all that junk you just said, now you're going to have to eat that back and try and convince the Marvel fans to go see this film. So you have a lot of work. You just made more work for yourself, you know. And all I'm saying is, you see how I do my videos. I can see the critiques for the film, and I actually acknowledge them. But I didn't go and bash the film. I didn't go and bash Joss Whedon. I didn't go and bash Jeff Johns or WB. They made their mistakes. They made their call. But I acknowledge that. I mentioned them. But I know it's still a good movie and it's worth the while to go see. And it's mostly Zack Snyder's cuts, Zack Snyder's scenes you see in that movie. There's 1 or 2 reshoots by Joss Whedon and a rearrangement of things. But it's mostly Zack Snyder stuff. And if it's a Zack Snyder film, it's going in Zack Snyder's direction. I don't think the essential direction of this film has been changed. I think the thing that has been changed in this film, and I don't think Superman was wearing any black suit, because I showed you the behind the scenes footage and Superman was wearing a blue suit. So that rumor that Superman was wearing a black suit and he came back in that's not true at all. I don't think so. That's my opinion. I don't know if I'm right. So at the end of the day, guys, we have to come together if you want this movie to succeed. We have the power to be able to run this engine now, and we could have the biggest comeback of all time with this movie. And at the end of the day, you guys gonna high five each other and say hooray, and then demand a Zack Snyder cut. That's the time to demand it, because you flexed your muscles and you showed WB, we bring in the cash here, not you. You know what I'm saying? So you gotta listen to us. We are the real DCEU fans, and you better listen to your base. You know what I'm saying? So that's what you had to do. Now you've proved your point. Opening weekend, Justice League did not do well, and it's because of you guys, and that's awesome. Now, after you flexed your muscles, let's get together and let's flex them again to show them the power of the real DCEU fans. Let all the DCEU fans unite and Marvel fans unite, and let's show them what comic book fans can do. Come on, guys, let's do this together. Come together over hope. Let's go.